Colorado, 1885. Some truths are not found in words, but in the spaces between them, in the quiet work of a pair of hands or the shared silence of a winter evening. This is a story about that kind of truth, the kind that grows slowly like a sturdy oak, in a place a man had long considered barren ground. Silas Blackwood measured his days by the sun's slow journey across the vast, indifferent sky. He had lived on this land for 30 years, and for the last 5 he had lived on it alone. The house, built for a family, now echoed with the singular sound of his boots on the floorboards. It was too large. Every empty room was a testament, a quiet accusation of what was no longer there. His wife, Martha, had been the life within these walls, her laughter, the mortar that held the stones together. Now, there was only Silas, his dog Buster, and the wind that moaned around the eaves like a restless spirit. He had stopped expecting things. It was the easiest way to live. He did not expect the spring thaw to come early, nor the summer rains to be plentiful. He did not expect a good price for his cattle at market, nor did he expect the ache in his bones to lessen with the years. Most of all, he did not expect the deep, hollow quiet inside him to ever be filled. He had accepted it the way a man accepts a scar. It was a part of him now, a landmark of a past he could not change. His routine was the fence that kept his grief contained. Up before dawn, coffee, black and bitter. Check the stock. Mend what was broken. A fence post, a harness, a loose hinge. Brock. The work was honest and demanding, and it left little room for thought. His hands, calloused and capable, knew their tasks without his mind needing to guide them. They were the hands of a man who had built a life, and then had to learn how to simply maintain its empty structure. Buster, a shepherd mix with one floppy ear and eyes the color of old amber, was his constant shadow. The dog understood the language of Silas's silence. He knew when to keep his distance, and when to press his heavy head against his master's knee. The dog, too, seemed to have stopped expecting much beyond the morning meal and the familiar scent of the man he followed. They were 2 solitary creatures, moving through a world that had once been full of sound and warmth. One Tuesday in late May, the world shifted. It did not happen with a crash of thunder or a sudden storm, but with the quiet, tired creak of a wagon wheel giving out on the dirt road that bordered his property. Silas saw it from the porch where he was oiling a saddle, a single wagon, pulled by a tired-looking mare, listed to one side like a wounded bird. A figure climbed down a woman. He watched, his hands stilling on the leather. He was not a man to rush into other people's troubles, but he was also not a man to leave someone stranded. He watched her for a long time as she assessed the damage. She did not panic. She did not wring her hands or look to the empty horizon for help. She walked calmly around the wagon, her movements efficient and measured. She ran a hand along the broken axle, her shoulders slumping just for a moment before she straightened them again. There was a resilience in that small gesture that caught his attention. Finally, after she had tried and failed to budge the wheel herself, she looked toward his ranch. Her gaze was direct. A question sent across the distance. Silas sighed, a sound that was more rust than air. He put the saddle aside, called for Buster, and began the long walk down the lane. Her name was Alara. She told him this without preamble, her voice low and steady. She was young, maybe half his age, with sun-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes the color of the summer sky just after a rainstorm. There were smudges of dust on her cheeks, and her hands, though slender, were clearly acquainted with hard work. "Axles split," she said, pointing. "Horses spent. I'd be grateful for some water and a place to rest her." "I can work for it?" It was not a plea. It was a proposal, an exchange of labor for kindness. He looked from her to the tired mare, then back to her. He saw the weariness deep in her eyes, a shadow that had nothing to do with the broken wagon. She was displaced. He could see that, running from something or to something, it made no difference. The West was full of people in motion. "There's a bunkhouse," he said, his own voice sounding rough from disuse. "You can stay there. Barn's got an empty stall." He didn't have to offer. He could have just helped her fix the wheel and sent her on her way, but he didn't. Something in her quiet self-possession reminded him faintly of the woman he had lost. Martha had faced hardship with that same squared-shoulder resolve. He helped her unhitch the mare and led the animal to the barn. Alara followed, carrying a small, worn satchel that seemed to hold all her worldly possessions. She moved with a competence that he recognized and respected. She knew her way around a horse, calming the animal with a soft voice and a gentle hand. She checked its legs, watered it, and rubbed it down before she even asked for a drink for herself. He watched her work, a silent observer. He saw the way she coiled a rope with an expert flick of her wrist, the way she checked the water trough for algae, the way her eyes scanned the barn, taking in its state of repair, its strengths, its weaknesses. She saw the world in practical terms, just as he did. That evening he took a plate of stew and a piece of bread out to the bunkhouse. He found her on the small porch, mending a tear in her dress with a neat, even stitch. The light from her lantern cast a warm, golden glow around her. It was a small circle of life in the vast, darkening landscape. She took the plate with a quiet, "Thank you." He just nodded and turned to leave. He was not a man for conversation. "Mr. Blackwood," she called after him. He stopped, turning back. "The bunkhouse is clean," she said. "Well maintained. You take good care of your things." It was a simple observation, but it landed on him with surprising weight. No one had commented on his life, his work, his home in years. He had been invisible in his own existence. He nodded again, a clumsy gesture of acknowledgement, and retreated to the big, empty house, feeling something stir in the quiet dust of his soul. The next day, the real observation began. He told her the wagon would take a few days to fix. He had to ride to town for a new axle, spoke a journey that would take the better part of a day each way. He told her she could stay, and she insisted on working to earn her keep. He agreed, thinking to give her some simple chores. He was wrong to assume she was not a woman for simple chores. On the first morning, he woke to the smell of coffee. Not his own bitter brew, but something richer. He walked into his kitchen to find a pot simmering on the stove and a plate of biscuits, impossibly light, on the table. Alara was nowhere to be seen. He looked out the window and saw her in the corral, working with his skittish new colt, a gelding that had fought him at every turn. She was not fighting the horse. She was talking to it, her voice a low murmur. She moved slowly, deliberately, her body a picture of calm confidence. She did not use force. She used patience. She waited for the horse to come to her, and it did. By the time he had finished his coffee, her coffee, she had a halter on the colt and was leading it around the corral in a gentle circle. He watched her for an hour, mesmerized. She accomplished more with quiet persistence in that one morning than he had with a week of frustrated effort. She understood the animal's fear. She spoke its language. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. He would wake to the smell of coffee. He would see her already at work weeding the vegetable patch Martha had planted, and he had let go wild, mending a section of fence he had been meaning to get to for months, cleaning out the chicken coop with an efficiency that shamed him. She did not ask for permission. She simply saw what needed doing and did it. Her work was a quiet conversation, a series of statements. "This is broken, I can fix it. This is neglected, I can tend it. This place is good. It deserves to be cared for." He found himself watching her constantly. He learned the rhythm of her movements, the set of her jaw when she was concentrating, the way she would pause in her work to watch a hawk circle in the sky. He started noticing things again. The color of the wildflowers blooming by the creek, the sound of the meadowlark's song, the world which had been gray and muted was slowly regaining its color, all because he was seeing it through the filter of her presence. One afternoon he found a patch on his favorite work coat, a worn spot on the elbow that had finally given way. The stitches were small and perfect, nearly invisible. He hadn't even realized it was torn. He ran his thumb over the patch, feeling the sturdy thread, a small gesture, a kindness he had not asked for and had not known he needed. It felt like a crack of light in a locked room. He started responding in his own silent way. He began leaving a stack of freshly split firewood by her bunkhouse door each evening, more than she would need. He made sure the water barrel was always full. When he rode to town to order the axle spoke, he bought a small bag of lemon drops, the kind Martha had loved, and left them on the bunkhouse porch without a word. He saw the empty bag the next day. Their relationship was built on this foundation of unspoken things, of actions, that spoke louder than any words could. It was a language both of them understood perfectly. A mended coat meant I see you are weary. A stack of firewood meant I want you to be warm. A pot of coffee meant good morning, I am here. The trip to town was a necessary evil. Silas preferred the solitude of his ranch to the noise and chatter of settlement life. Mr. Gable, the owner of the mercantile, was a good man, but he had a way of prying that was as persistent as a summer fly. Silas Gable said, leaning on the counter, "Good to see you." "Been a while." He peered over his spectacles. "Heard you got some help out at your place." News traveled fast in a small community. "Wagon broke down," Silas said, keeping his voice flat. "Just for a few days." "A few days," Gable repeated, a knowing glint in his eye. "Young woman, they say." "Capable." Silas focused on his list. "I need a new axle spoke for a freighter wagon, and some flour, salt." Gable nodded, letting it drop for a moment. But as he was weighing out the flour, another man entered the store. Jedediah Thorne. Thorne owned the largest ranch in the county, a sprawling enterprise inherited from his father. He was a man who radiated a smooth, polished confidence, his clothes always a little too new, his smile a little too practiced. He saw himself as the natural leader of their small community, a man of importance. "Blackwood," Thorne said, his voice booming in the quiet store. "Heard you took in a stray, a pretty one, at that." Silas stiffened. The way Thorne said it, a stray, made it sound like she was a lost puppy, not a person. "She's a hard worker," Silas said, his voice tight. Thorne laughed. "I'm sure she is. A woman like that needs a proper situation. A man who can provide for her, not an old homesteader living with his memories." He winked at Gable. "If you're not careful, Silas, a man with better prospects might just ride out and make her an offer she can't refuse." The threat was veiled, but clear. Thorne saw Alara as a prize to be won, a beautiful and capable addition to his prosperous life. He saw her value, but only in terms of what she could do for him. The thought, Thorne's polished hands on Alara, of his booming voice filling her quiet spaces, sent a cold, unfamiliar anger through Silas. He paid for his goods, loaded them onto his pack mule, and left without another word. The ride home was long. Thorne's words echoed in his head, an old homesteader living with his memories. Was that all he was? He had never thought of himself as old. He was strong, capable. But the numbers were plain. He was 52. Ilara couldn't be more than 25. Thorne was right. It wasn't sensible. What could he offer a young woman with her whole life ahead of her? A quiet house full of ghosts. A man who had forgotten how to speak of anything but cattle and weather. He arrived back at the ranch to find Ilara on her knees in Martha's garden, patiently pulling weeds from around the stubborn rose bushes that had survived years of neglect. She looked up as he approached, shielding her eyes from the sun. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "You're back," she said, and in that moment, the cold anger and doubt melted away, replaced by a simple, profound feeling of rightness. This was home, and she was here, for now. It is a strange and wonderful thing to have your voice reach across the miles and find a home in someone's ears. I often wonder where you all are as you listen to these stories. What country are you listening from today? If you feel so inclined, drop it in the comments below. It means everything to me to know where this voice is reaching, to feel that connection across the continents and oceans. It reminds me that these stories of the heart are universal, no matter the language or the land. Now, let's get back to the story, because Silas is about to find Alara in a moment of trouble, and what happens next will change everything. He fixed the wagon. The work was straightforward, a familiar puzzle of wood and iron. He worked with a deliberate slowness he did not understand. Every turn of the wrench, every tap of the hammer, felt like a step toward an ending he did not want. When the wheel was finally secure, solid, and true, a sense of dread settled in his chest. There was no reason for her to stay now. He found her by the river. It was the same stretch of water where he and Martha used to walk in the evenings, the water whispering over the smooth stones. It was a place heavy with memory, a place he had avoided for 5 years. He had been drawn there by an instinct he couldn't name, and when he saw her, he understood. She was sitting on a large, flat rock, her back to him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sound was a knife in the quiet air. He had only ever seen her as strong, capable, and composed. To see her broken was to see a crack in the world itself. His first instinct was to turn back, to leave her to her private grief. It was not his place. But his feet would not move. He thought of all the small kindnesses she had shown him, the mended coat, the morning coffee, the way she had brought life back to his silent world without even trying. He could not leave her alone. He walked toward her, his steps slow and measured on the soft earth. Buster trotted ahead and nudged her hand with his wet nose, whining softly. She started, quickly wiping at her eyes. Silas said nothing. Words were clumsy tools, and he did not trust them. Instead, just sat down on the rock beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. He stared out at the water, at the way the setting sun painted streaks of orange and purple on its surface. He just sat there, a silent, solid presence, a witness to her sorrow. They sat in silence for a long time. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the air grew cool. Finally, she took a shuddering breath. "Jedediah Thorne came by this afternoon," she said, her voice small and rough. Silas's hands tightened into fists on his knees. He kept his eyes on the river. "He made me an offer," she continued. "He wants to marry me. He has the biggest ranch in the valley. He said he could give me anything I wanted, a fine house, dresses, security." She paused. He said it was a sensible choice. Sensible. There was that word again. The world's logic. The arithmetic of a good match. She turned to him then, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. "He said I was wasting my time here, with an old man in a sad house." Still, Silas said nothing. What could he say? That Thorne was wrong? By every measure the world used, Thorne was right. Alara let out a small, bitter laugh. "I told him I would think on it." She took another shaky breath, and then she did something that stopped his heart. She leaned in, closing the space between them, and rested her head on his shoulder. Her hair smelled of sunshine and wood smoke. Her small weight against him was both a comfort and an agony. It was everything he had told himself he could never have. Again, "I don't want a sensible choice, Silas," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost to the sound of the river. "I just want a place to be still." He did not move. He did not breathe. He just let her lean on him, feeling the warmth of her seep into his old, cold bones. She was not crying over the offer she had received. She was crying over the offer she wanted and feared would never come. And in that moment, sitting by the river of his memories, he knew he was in trouble. The fence he had built around his heart had been breached, not by a grand assault, but by a quiet woman who made good coffee and leaned on him when she cried. He spent the next 2 days in a state of internal war. He worked from dawn until dusk, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion, hoping to silence the voice in his head. It did not work. An old man in a sad house, the words were a brand on his thoughts. He walked through the rooms of his home, seeing them for the first time through Thorne's eyes. The furniture was worn, the curtains were faded. Martha's rocking chair still sat by the cold hearth, a silent monument. It was a sad house. It was a house full of ghosts. He did the arithmetic. He was 52, she was 25. A 27-year difference. By the time she was his age, he would be in the ground. It was not fair to her. To tether her youth and vitality to his slow decline. It was selfish. It was wrong. He would be a fool to think he could offer her a life. All he had was an ending. Thorn could offer her a beginning. He decided, with the grim finality of a judge passing sentence, that he had to let her go. He would tell her to take Thorn's offer. It was the only decent thing to do. It was the sensible thing to do. He would tell her in the morning. He would help her pack, he would watch her ride away, and his world would go back to being gray and silent, as it should be. The brief flash of color had been a mistake, a trick of the light. That afternoon, his neighbor, John Miller, rode over with his 8-year-old son, Leo. They came by every few months to trade news. While John and Silas talked about cattle prices, Leo, a boy with an unnervingly direct gaze, wandered into the kitchen. Alara was there, baking bread. Silas saw her smile at the boy, a genuine, unguarded smile that made his chest ache. She gave Leo a warm biscuit, and the boy sat at the table, munching happily. When it was time for them to leave, Leo came to stand before Silas, his biscuit finished. "Mr. Blackwood," the boy said, looking up at him with serious eyes. "Leo," Silas acknowledged. "That lady," Leo said, pointing a thumb toward the kitchen. "She makes the house not so quiet." He tilted his head. "Does she make the quiet in you go away?" The question was so simple, so direct. It bypassed all of Silas's carefully constructed arguments. It went straight to the heart of the matter. The arithmetic of age, the logic of sensibility, the ghosts of the past, they all crumbled to dust in the face of that one simple truth. She did. She made the quiet go away. It was not about what was sensible. It was not about numbers on a calendar. It was about the value of a thing. What was the value of a morning that began with the smell of coffee? What was the value of a mended coat? What was the value of a presence that filled the empty spaces without making a sound? These things had no price. They could not be calculated. They could only be felt. Jedediah Thorn could give her a fine house, but Silas knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he could not give her a place to be still. He could not make the quiet go away. Silas looked over at Alara, who was now standing in the doorway of the house, watching the Millers ride off. She gave a small wave. Her eyes met his across the yard, and in them he saw not pity, not duty, but a quiet, waiting hope. He had a choice. He could be sensible, or he could be brave. He could stay in his sad house with his memories, or he could walk across the yard and try to build a new one. He walked across the yard. He found her in the bunkhouse. Her small satchel was open on the cot, a few meager possessions laid out beside it. She was not packing to go to Thorn. She was packing to leave altogether. To run. The sight of it spurred him on. She looked up as he filled the doorway, her expression guarded. He did not know where to begin. The words were a tangled knot in his throat. So he started with the truth. "I'm not a young man." "Ella," he said, his voice raw. "I don't have grand promises or a fine future to offer. Thorn can give you all of that. He can give you the world." He took a breath, holding her steady gaze. "All I have is this place, this land, and the years I have left. They're quiet years, and they're likely to be hard ones." He swallowed. The next words, the heaviest he had ever lifted. "But I find I don't want to face them alone. I was hoping you might share them with me." It was not a proposal of marriage, in the traditional sense. It was something more fundamental, an offering of a shared life, a shared silence. He had laid his broken, empty world at her feet and asked if she would be willing to help him rebuild it. She did not answer right away. She just looked at him, her sky-blue eyes seeming to see right through to the scarred and frightened man he was. He saw a flicker of emotion in their depth relief. He thought a profound and bone-deep relief. She closed her satchel. She stood up and walked toward him until she was standing just inches away. She reached out and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart, which was hammering like a blacksmith's forge. "Silas," she said, her voice soft but firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I was hoping you'd ask." The acceptance was so simple, so direct, it unmade him. The tension he had carried for 5 years, the rigid posture of a man bracing himself against further loss, simply dissolved. He felt his shoulders slump, not in defeat, but in surrender. He reached up and covered her hand with his own. The next morning they rode to town together. They did not ride as a rancher and his hired help. They rode side by side. He saw people watch them from their porches, from the windows of the saloon. He did not care. For the first time in years, did not care what the world thought. They went straight to the town clerk's office and bought a marriage license. The clerk, a man with a perpetually surprised expression, blinked at them several times, but filled out the paperwork without comment. From there, they went to the mercantile. Mr. Gable was behind the counter, as always. He saw them enter together, saw the paper in Silas's hand. He looked from Silas to Alara, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He simply nodded, a gesture of deep and heartfelt approval. As they were leaving, Jedediah Thorne rode past on his handsome bay horse. He saw them. He saw the way Alara stood close to Silas, the way Silas's hand rested gently on the small of her back. He saw the paper. His face tightened for a moment, his handsome features hardening. But he was, if nothing else, a man who understood defeat. He reined in his horse, and to Silas's surprise, he tipped his hat. It was a curt, dismissive gesture, but it was an acknowledgment, a concession. The contest was over. They were married by the circuit judge that afternoon in a simple ceremony with Mr. Gable and his wife as witnesses. There were no flowers, no fine clothes, no celebration. There were only the quiet, steady words, the joining of two hands, and the shared understanding that they were stepping into a future they would build together. A future that was not sensible, but was, in every way that mattered, true. A year passed, then another. The house was no longer too big. It had filled up, not with children, but with life. The sound of Alara's humming as she worked in the kitchen, the smell of baking bread, the sight of her books stacked by the hearth, laughter, a sound Silas had thought was gone from his life forever, was now a regular guest. Martha's rose bushes, under Alara's patient care, thrived. They bloomed in a riot of crimson and pink, their scent filling the summer air. The vegetable garden was a testament to her skill, providing them with more than they could eat. The house was no longer sad. It was a home. It was warm. The quiet inside Silas had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a hollow, aching void. It was a peaceful silence, a space of contentment he shared with another person. He found that words came easier to him now. He would tell her about his day, about a calf that was born, about a storm cloud he saw on the horizon. She would listen, her presence a calm anchor in his world. She, in turn, would read to him in the evenings, from her books, her voice a gentle melody against the crackle of the fire. One evening in late May, 2 years to the day since she had arrived with her broken wagon, they walked down to the river. They sat on the same flat rock where he had found her crying. The water whispered over the stones, the same song it had always sung. He took her hand. It was no longer the hand of a stranger. It was as familiar to him as his own. It fit perfectly. She leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had done that first time. But this time, there were no tears. There was only a deep, abiding peace. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice low. "Choosing this?" "Choosing me." She turned her head to look at him, her eyes clear and full of a love that still humbled him. "Silas," she said softly, I didn't choose a life. I chose a man. And I have never for one moment been sorry. He looked out at the river, at the endless, beautiful sky, and felt a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. He had not expected this. He had not expected anything. And yet, here it was. A gift, a second chance, a quiet love that had healed him from the inside out. And so, we come to the end of our story, but the truth of it lingers. There is a kind of arithmetic the world teaches us to use. The math of age, of wealth, of social standing. It is a cold and unforgiving calculus that often leads to sensible and desperately unhappy conclusions. Jedediah Thorne was a man who lived by this arithmetic. He saw Alara as a valuable asset, a sum to be added to his own prosperous equation. He made a sensible offer, and he could not understand why it was refused. But Silas, guided by the quiet wisdom of a child, learned to count differently. He learned that the true value of a person is not found in numbers. It is found in character. It is measured in quiet competence, in unasked for kindness, in the courage to sit with someone in their sorrow without needing to fix it. He learned that a mended coat can be worth more than a fine house, and that a shared silence can be more precious than all the world's praise. This story is a reminder that the heart has its own logic, one that defies calculation. It tells us that it is never too late to let someone in, to let the light crack through the walls we have built around ourselves. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not to fight or to conquer, but to simply sit beside someone who is hurting, and in that shared stillness, find a new beginning. It is about choosing, not what is sensible, but what is true. Thank you for your time and your attention. It is the greatest gift you can give, and it is your presence here that allows this channel to continue to share these stories of the human heart. I hope that wherever you are, you feel a measure of the peace that Silas and Alara found by their quiet river. Until next time, keep writing your own story.